Hey everyone, Clio here and welcome to 2021, the first video of 2021. Of course it had to be my December wrap-up. So basically out with the old and in with the new? I guess not. I will still be talking about 2020 for the foreseeable future. Probably up until the 7th of January I will have a daily video go up that is going to be talking about, the best, the worst, surprising, disappointing, all of those things, and some reading statistics for the year 2020. But so today I'm starting with my December wrap-up. So the first two books that I finished in the month of December I actually talked about at length in my December mid-month check-in. Didn't do a mid-month wrap-up because I only read two books at that time. So if you want more information on these books you can definitely go there. Mind you, I also talk about what I was currently reading and what I still plan to get around to in the month of December. So you just need to follow those first two books and then you can go back to this video to see the rest of my reading. So if you want more information on Dawnshard by Sanderson and on Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Café by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, then do go to that video that I will have linked up there. So let's look at the second half of December. Basically we need to start with a DNF, and basically I DNF'd this book after filming my mid-month check-in. That day I filmed a couple of videos. I filmed like 5 videos, and in a couple of them I talked about that book and about how much I was struggling with it. I picked up this book in October. I tried to read it in October. I picked it up like the day before Halloween or something because it was a spooky read. I didn't get a lot of it done at that point in time. I tried a little bit in November, barely got anything done in November. In December I got to the midway point of this book, but I really had to push myself, and because I was starting to feel like I wouldn't get around to some of the main priorities for the month of December, I finally decided just DNF it. It's fine. I don't DNF easily, as you can tell from that, so it was actually only my third DNF for the year. It's something I would like to change, but will it change? I don't have much hope for that because it is always such a struggle for me to do it. But so that would be Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. In Dark Places we are looking at Libby Day. She is the survivor of a family drama, and the only other survivor was her brother Ben. However, she pointed the authorities to her brother in saying that he is the killer. However, we are now like 20 years later or so, and there's a sort of amateur group that is contacting her in order to discuss the case because they are of the opinion that Ben didn't do it. So this story very much centers around the idea of figuring out who actually killed these people, and that very much needs to be something that you're interested in order for you to be able to continue through with it. So I'm somebody who, when a mystery thriller is about finding the culprit, I'm really not that interested. I don't care about finding the culprit. In case of a robbery, for example, I don't care who did it. I don't care about all those things. I don't want to know who murdered somebody. All of that is not as important as the fact that somebody was murdered. So I much rather would have a story that is like the lead up to this murder, because I actually like the perspective from her brother Ben, who we were following in the past perspective before the killings had actually taken place. So that is a story that could work for me. So a mystery thriller in that sense of the word, but not a mystery thriller in which we are looking back on something that happened and trying to figure out how that came to be. Doesn't work for me. Then the book that comprised the bulk of my reading within the month of December is a book that I started in July officially, though I barely did any reading for it in the month of July. Most of my reading for this book happened in the month of August, in which I read the first like 300 pages of this, and the month of December, in which I read the remaining 600 or 700. And that will be The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. So this is a French classic. It is often referred to as the greatest revenge story of all time. In this one we are following our protagonist Dantes, who will later become the Count of Monte Cristo. So Dantes is an up-and-coming sailor who has just been promised a promotion to captain. He is returning home for the season to hand over some of the riches he has acquired to his father so that he can live a comfortable life in his absence, and to meet up with his fiancée Mercedes. However, all of this success has of course led to some jealousy in the people around him, and so these people conspire against Dantes and land him into prison for being a Bonapartist. This story is about Edmond Dantes escaping from prison becoming the famous Count of Monte Cristo and seeking revenge on the people who have wronged him. The revenge story is definitely the main part of this story. I think, as I said, I read about to the 300-page mark, somewhere like that, in the month of August. At that point in time, we were already entering into the revenge part of this book. So it is a revenge plot of epic proportions, and I will definitely say that there are some points within the book in which I was starting to feel like, why are we making it so complicated? Why are we putting so many characters into this revenge plot? And in which I was starting to doubt whether it would actually be worth its length. However, I will say that everything comes together, so whichever character that you're introduced to, whichever small side plot that is taken, eventually it leads somewhere. It is not like we are introducing these side plots to make things longer, because in principle Alexandre Dumas was paid by the word the way that Dickens is. However, everything leads somewhere, everything ties in towards the very end of this book, towards the revenge plot that Dantes has been building. So in that sense, know that there is definitely a lull in the middle section of this book. Know that it's going there, know that you need to keep your attention on these new characters being introduced, because you are going to need them later on within this story. So I absolutely love this one, and it is probably like a 4-star, 4.5-star read for me. It's not my new favorite classic, but that's just because I have some classics high on a pedestal, and so this one is one that I very much enjoyed, I very much appreciated, but it also didn't really transcend any sort of level. But so it is definitely a very digestible classic. I think it's one that most people could read and could enjoy, because it is an easy read. The language isn't any sort of complex language that you need to spend a lot of time on trying to understand what is being said. There isn't necessarily any sort of like deeper layering to what is being said neither, so it is very easy to comprehend. And as we are aware of the identity of the Count of Monte Cristo, where nobody else is, we as a reader are kind of co-conspirators with the Count of Monte Cristo, which helps push that reading pace towards the latter half of this book. Negative parts to this story will say that there is a lull towards the middle section of this book, as we are leaving our protagonist Edmond Dantes and changing into the Count of Monte Cristo, because at that point in time we basically are introduced to a whole lot of new characters, but we're also reintroduced to a lot of our old characters, basically to the conspirators of the past, and we need to kind of reintroduce and catch up to what they have done and where they are in their lives at this point in time. And so that definitely brings the pacing down a little bit at that point in time, and it's also important that you do still keep attention to it, because those characters are of importance for the remainder of the story. Apart from that, I also have a minor qualm with the fact that Edmond Dantes sees his whole revenge plot as a sort of like religious mission, and while he will start to question those motives later on in the book, towards the end he's kind of back to the idea that he was sent by God to enact revenge. And so as a modern, non-religious reader, I would have liked for him to kind of come to terms with the fact that he was just personally motivated to it, that it was just about personal revenge, it was starting to go there at some point in time, but then it kind of backtracked at some point. So if it wouldn't have backtracked on that, it would possibly also have been a 5-star read for me, for example. Some things that I did very much love about this one is the character of Eugénie Dantes, for example, who is possibly an asexual character. In any case, she's a female character in a classical literary piece who doesn't want to get married, who wants to live her life on her own, who wants to get by off of her art and just live an independent life. Love to see that. I very much loved the character of Mr. Noirtier, who at the very beginning is a contributing factor to Dantes' downfall without him having any active part in that. So you're kind of on the fence about him as a character, but later on in the book I absolutely grew to love this character, as he is somebody who is fully paralyzed and so he cannot easily communicate with people, but he has worked out the system with the people who are close to him of a certain way of blinking, for example, indicating yes or no, and so through that means he can communicate with people, and his communication will turn out to be paramount through the development of the plot through making sure that certain people are held accountable for their actions. And so I just absolutely loved seeing that disability representation in this classic, seeing a character who doesn't have a voice be given such a central communication role within this story. Apart from that, I just love the overall narrative style. It's easy to digest, it is very quick to fly through, it is quick to read through, and so that's definitely what you want in an over 1000 page classic. Next up, I read Weather by Jenny Offill. So this is a book that I absolutely needed to fit in the month of December because it's been on my TBR multiple times within 2020. It was on my most anticipated reads list for 2020, so it needed to happen. I needed to get this one done. And in the end, I gotta say, I'm a little bit disappointed with it. It was a book that I was kind of hesitant going into because it is literary fiction, and I knew it had a little bit of an experimental writing style, so that could be hit or miss, and sadly it did turn out to be a little bit of a miss, though I cannot even fully say that. So in Weather, we're basically looking at this woman who's working in a library. She's working at the reception desk, more or less, and at some point in the story she also accepts this sort of side job to answer emails that are sent to this sort of writer, and these emails are questions about all sorts of things. And so this story is basically about everything and nothing, which in that sense really reminded me a lot of Duck's Newbury Report by Lucy Ellman, which is very funny because that's like an over 1000 page book, stream of consciousness style, that is a struggle to get through. This is a 200 page book that has a lot of paragraph breaks, so it is very easy to read. And in both of these books, we're basically looking at the troubles of our times, the anxiety of living at a time in which you have such things taking place as the election of Donald Trump, as climate change becoming more and more of a doom scenario, in which we're looking at the anxiety over what we are living through, but also the anxiety of what our children will have to live through. And so while I thought that that was interesting, this entire book is so fragmentary that I also didn't really connect to the character, for example, which is a very big contrast with the way in which it was done in Duck's Newbury Report, for example, where I felt like I knew that character better than I've ever known any character in my life. But in the end, while I loved the writing style, I will definitely say it was so easy to fly through, and I loved the way in which it was told. In the end, I definitely felt like it needed to come together a little bit more for me to be able to appreciate it. With the way in which the story ended, I felt like it could have been like 100 pages shorter, it could have been 500 pages longer, and it wouldn't have made an impact because it was just a fragment of this person's life, and there was no real lesson to be made from it. There was no real reason for why this fragment was chosen and not another fragment, or that at least is how I felt about it. And so in the end, I couldn't really wrap my head around my experience with this book. And so my final thought about that is just going to be that it was a little bit disappointing. So yeah, happy I finally got around to it, but sadly it was a little bit of a letdown. Next up, we have The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien, the final book in The Lord of the Rings. So The Lord of the Rings is one big book. That's how it's originally written. It is often divided into parts in order to make it more digestible. And I will say this entire experience has been so fun. I have so much loved going back into this world, meeting up with these characters and that plot again. However, the overall conclusion is that I do love the movie version a lot more. On BookTube we often talk about plot-focused readers versus character-focused readers, and I think that this book is for world-building focused readers. So it is very much a book that centers around this history, this story, which in a way makes it more suitable for plot-focused readers. However, it's also not focused on delivering as thrilling of a plot as it could. For example, if you're going into action sequences, they are often just kind of glossed over. Tolkien definitely doesn't focus on them, so it's definitely the overall story, the overall journey that is mostly centered on. And so I think for fully plot-focused readers, it will probably be a little bit too slow. For character-focused readers going into this after seeing the movies, I think you'll be somewhat disappointed with the fact that so much character work went into the movies that wasn't there in the books. I think there's the bare bones of characters, but Tolkien definitely wasn't zooming in on characters and on the way in which character dynamics worked, or the sort of like inner thoughts of our characters, the way in which certain events had ramifications for the way in which the character was feeling, the way in which the character was acting. And so for me as a character-focused reader, that is something that I absolutely love and that I absolutely need in order to love a book. So I do love the story, but I don't necessarily love the focuses that Tolkien puts within his rendition of the story. I will say that I did definitely enjoy the Scouring of the Shire, which is a part that is not in the movie version, and maybe because I couldn't make that comparison, that chapter I definitely appreciated a whole lot when I read it this time around within the books, because it's a nice way of rounding off this story and of showing the character growth within some of these characters. Another interesting thing about the reread for Lord of the Rings is there are so many shifts that happen with quotes that are taken from one point of the book that go to other points that go from one character to another, and sometimes they really have ramifications for the meaning of those quotes. So for example, there's a quote from Faramir that gets transmitted to Wormtongue within the movies, which is a very interesting shift, and which made me kind of uncomfortable when I read it in the words of Faramir in the book version. There's a quote by Treebeard at the very end of this book that has moved to the sort of like prologue sequence for the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy. So there are definitely interesting shifts to see, and it's very interesting to see which effect they have. And I think that that is an interesting thing to look at, the way in which these books and movies differ. But for me, the movie version definitely has my heart. It wins out. It's one of those exceptions where I love the movie more than I love the book. And then the final book that I read in 2020, which I finished 50 minutes before the end of the year, would be The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. I was adamant it was going to happen. However, the procrastination also worked against me there, because I started this on Christmas Day. And I think I read about 140 pages in it in those 6 days, and then I read the remaining 300 pages of this in the final day of the year. So I definitely did take it quite easy before that, and I don't know whether it was just that I was hyper-focused because of procrastination that final day, or whether I just had gotten to a point where the story sucked me in more, but it wasn't a struggle for me to get that in on that final day. It was a struggle in terms of time, but it wasn't a struggle in terms of me being able to keep my focus on it, because it was such a good one. Because I've always said, so The Stone Sky is part of the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. All of these books have won the Hugo Award, and it is basically described as sort of like environmental fantasy. It is a end of the world fantasy in a sense, because we start off this book from multiple perspectives, but mainly the perspective that we're following is the perspective of Esun. And so in Esun's perspective, we're definitely looking at a world that is on the brink of a new season, and seasons within this world are basically sort of like ice ages or things like that. It's periods in which humanity really struggles to survive because resources are scarce, and so this world that we are inhabiting is very hard. It is hard. The people in it have become hard, and it is a very complicated read. Especially the first book is complicated because we're dealing with some complications of perspective as well. You have to get used to the fact that there's a second person perspective in there as well. It is so complex, especially the first two books. Oftentimes you're kind of left, you kind of struggling to comprehend what is taking place. And this third one is offering answers, which is part of what I definitely liked, because I was kind of saying at some point when I was still in the beginning of this third book that it is not a new favorite of mine, because I don't feel like I understand it enough to be able to make it a new favorite. But a lot of things are definitely made clear within this third one, and it changes your whole conception of this series, this third one. It really indicates a lot more about this world, about things that previously have always been kept in the dark to us as readers, and it really kind of shifts it from fantasy into sci-fi a lot more. So I just thought it was brilliant. It's amazing. There are still things that are unclear to me about how they work, but I'm also not somebody who needs all of the answers, for example. Are the answers in there? Maybe. Probably you could find the answers yourself, but I wasn't smart enough to do that. But I absolutely love this one. It is also a fantasy series by a black female author, which doesn't happen very often, so please go and show it the love that it rightfully deserves, because if you've read a lot of fantasy, you definitely need to try this one out. It's very different. It's probably more sci fantasy as well, and so it is just, yeah, it's mind-boggling, it's complicated, but it definitely pays out in the end. Not just in this third book, by the way. I definitely did, like, I gave the first book, the 5th season, 4 stars, gave the Obelisk Gate 5 stars, and will be giving the Stone Sky 5 stars as well. So yeah, that is my December reading. So in all, I read 7 books in the month of December, which is basically what I read the entirety of, like, September, October, November, December. I read 7 books all of those months, I think. I read just under 3,000 pages, but I am quite happy with what I achieved in the month of December and what I read in the month of December, especially with going out with such a bang. But so yeah, that is my December wrap up. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts were on them. Are you of the same mind as me? Do you have a different opinion? Definitely let me know, and then we can talk about it in the comments. Hope you enjoyed this video and would love to see you in a future one. Bye!